Morning, everyone. Thank you. I'm actually a trustee of the Joseph Rowntree Charitable Trust. We have 3 sister trusts, and sometimes they get a bit confused, so I wouldn't want the foundation getting frustrated that I was claiming to be part of them. Morning, I am Emily Miles. I'm currently a director in the Cabinet Office working on better business compliance, which is all about trading standards and illegal working and the illicit economy. But until March, I was the director of policing in the Home Office, which sadly didn't mean I was in charge of 43 chief constables, but did mean that I was in charge of the institution of policing in Britain, so what kind of powers and money that they get, what their responsibilities are. And before that, I've closed down a police in Quango. That was my job in 2011. I ran a caseworking directorate in the UK Border Agency when it existed, trying to clear the asylum backlog. And I also was a policy advisor to Tony Blair in Downing Street for 2 or 3 years. So I've done various things in the centre of government for about 14 years. I was asked to talk to why we need new leaders. And I wanted to talk about what the kinds of pressures are that the public sector is facing at the moment. And I suspect these are true for you as they are for me. We've already heard about it. The first one is money. Since 2010, we've faced this enormous cut in public spending. And in 2011, I was running systems thinking seminars for senior civil servants who were petrified about the cuts that they were going to have to make. They'd been growing for 5 years. They'd been just increasing staff, giving people promotions, thinking differently about what they want to do, but spending money to solve public sector problems. Since 2010, we've had to contract. There are now 400,000 civil servants. In 2010, there were 500,000 civil servants. So money is a major factor. But the other parts of the world are changing too. The second big thing is demography. How old are you going to be in 2030? Can you work that out quickly? Well, how agile are your minds? If you're going to be 65 in 2030 and you're a man, your life expectancy is 88. That's the average life expectancy. Some of you will live longer and some of you will live a little less, but the average is going to be 88. If you're a woman, the life expectancy is going to be 91. In 2030, there are going to be double the amount of people as now who are aged 85 and over. So that's the demographic change that we're going to be facing. And then the last one I wanted to draw your attention to is the internet. In 2013, so last year, there were 36 million adults, that's 73% of us, who access the internet every day. That's 20 million more than there were in 2006. That's a huge shift. At the moment, this year, something like 3/4 of us shop online. And just a few years ago, in 2008, that was half of us. So that's a huge shift. Access to the internet using a mobile phone doubled between 2010 and 2013 from 1/4 of us to 1/2 of us. So there's this huge shift going on as we move to the internet. And you can see that in some of the programs that government has run. So if you've come across DirectGov in the last 5 years, government decided, well, why should you need to understand the bureaucratic structures of government to access a service? Why should you need to know that getting a passport is from the Home Office or getting a driving licence is from the Department for Transport, the DVLA? You should just be able to Google it and find it and get it. There's been this massive reshift of services online through DirectGov. Another example is that we've tried crowdsourcing policy. I don't know if you've heard of the Red Tape Challenge, but again, 2010 to 2011, there was this big website which invited lots of contributions about regulation that was getting in the way of growth. And since then, there are nearly 3,000 regulations that have been amended, abolished, changed, because of what people offered. And then the internet has even affected the House of Commons, which sometimes seems extraordinary. But they have this e-petition thing. So if you get 100,000 signatures on an e-petition, there's a committee in the House of Commons that has to consider whether that issue should be debated on the floor of the House. And in September, there was a debate on access to research money for pancreatic cancer because of an e-petition. At the moment, there are e-petitions going on holidays in school term time. There have been debates on the Badger Cull, so that this whole much more democratic, there's still a long way to go, but much more democratic engagement with the public. There's also been a huge change in data. So the government has put 230 data sets out into the public domain, kind of unwashed, unstructured, just available to people to use. So for instance, a company has taken one of the Environment Agency data sets and turned that into an application so that you can see where there are going to be flooding risks in particular rivers or floodplains. And that's just because data's out there. You've got the same thing with police crime data. So these three things, I could have pointed to a number of others: the environment, well-being, inequalities, these shifts that are happening very rapidly, but certainly on finance, on demography, and in terms of our connectedness with each other, are major challenges for the public sector. We're quite siloed, we're quite hierarchical, we're not good at responding to these very rapid shifts. So what does that mean for us as leaders? What do we need to do differently? Well, I think there are two qualities that you need to cultivate if you're going to be a leader in this kind of a space. And the first one is humility. And I think Oliver Cromwell put it best. He was writing a letter to the Scots. I'm not quite sure what about, but he basically said to them, think it possible that you might be mistaken. Probably not repeating now in this era. But I think that's a question we need to ask ourselves all the time. I sat for 3 years at the top of a 1,000-strong caseworking directorate in immigration, and I suffered from the illusion that I knew what was happening amongst those 1,000 people. I really didn't. And when you sit at the top of an organisation, you assume that you have this godlike view of the system. It is a total fallacy. When I was running this caseworking directorate, we were considering asylum cases, and every single case needed to be checked against the police national computer. We needed to see if the person who was applying for asylum had a criminal record, having been here for a year or two or longer, because it was a backlog. And for the first 18 months or so that I was running this directorate, my senior team kept telling me there was a problem with the PNC checks. They were slow, we weren't getting them in the volume we needed, and I would have conversations with the people in the Home Office who could sort out the PNC, and it was all sort of operational management. And then one Christmas holiday, I decided that I would go and spend a couple of days doing the filing on the floor with the caseworkers. And I went between Christmas and New Year and literally spent 2 days getting PNC checks, the piece of paper, and trying to link it to the relevant caseworking file. And it was a nightmare, and it was so slow. And people kept walking past going, oh, Emily Miles is doing the filing. But it made such a difference because I realised that the problem wasn't to do with flow of PNC checks. Having put myself into the caseworker's shoes, into the administrator's shoes, I realised that there was quite a simple fix we could do, making it automated, so we could get the electronic information about the PNC check, put it onto the electronic record, and it saved us about 5 to 6 days in time elapsed on the caseworking. And that was because I had assumed I was right. I had assumed that my analysis of the problem was correct, and it was only when I went and stood in someone else's shoes and got a different perspective that I understood there was a different way through. Another example I'd like to give you isn't mine, but it's a colleague of mine who's taught a lot of systems thinking. Went to work in Manchester. He was invited in to run a session on antisocial behaviour. And there were all these different people in the room. There were youth workers, there were parents, there were police officers, there were probation officers, and they all had their different understanding of what the problem was with antisocial behaviour in Manchester. One person thought it was to do with there not being enough diversionary activities for kids. They just needed to be entertained more. Another person thought it was parenting was the problem. Another person thought it was just discipline. You needed to be stricter with these kids. And then a youth worker piped up apparently and said, you know what, those ASBOs, those antisocial behaviour orders, they work really well on the new gang members, but they don't work very well on the seasoned ones, particularly on the gang leaders, because they just see it as a badge of honour. And all the other people in the room, the people who laid the ASBOs onto the kids, the police officers and the social workers, hadn't understood this distinction. And again, they didn't think it possible that they were mistaken. They needed to stand in someone else's shoes and get more information so that they could think of a way through the problem they were trying to solve. So I would encourage you to keep your ears open. You need to be a listener as a leader. You need to be humble and you need to be open to what is being told to you, because you haven't got the capacity to take in the level of change and difference that's going on out there, given what's going on with the internet, given the different generational shifts. You have to be listening and open to what's happening. The second skill that I think you need is the opposite. You need to disturb the equilibrium. You need to be bold. You need to make waves. And this diagram, I don't know how visible it is, it's from Ronald Heifetz's book, Adaptive Leadership. And basically he's saying that some kinds of change are quite simple. You know, the organisation knows how to do them. Introducing a new course. You've done it before, you know what to do. And the level of conflict you need to create for that kind of change is quite small. For changes where someone has to lose stuff, where they have to adapt, you have to create some conflict as a leader. You have to be provocative. And you need to, therefore, create the zone of disequilibrium, is his phrase. You need to create a little bit of noise to get things moving. And I like to think of it in terms of lobster pots. So I don't know if you ever had the experience of not finding the answer to a problem that you're really stuck with, and then suddenly you get it. And often the moment when you suddenly get it is when you're not thinking about the problem at all. You've gone for a walk, or you've woken up in the middle of the night, or you've had a drink with your partner, and you suddenly get the answer. And it's because you've stepped away from the problem and you've got out of the trap that you've set yourself. As leaders, we have to help other people get out of their traps, get out of their lobster pots. Lobster pots work because they catch lobsters but don't catch fish. So these are traps often that just work for you but not for everyone else. And just to give you a couple of examples of this happening in the public sector at the moment. A couple of years ago, if you were a police officer and you arrested someone tending a cannabis farm, you would think that they were probably an organised criminal and they were a drug dealer. 2 years later, with additional training, additional guidance, now you might think that they're a slave. And that shift in mindset is because people have had to be taught to look out for vulnerability in these sorts of situations. Another example, in Lincolnshire Police at the moment, about 2 years ago, 500 plus people were tupied from the police force into Group 4, and they ran the back office functions. And they have achieved various savings, enough to give an additional 35 frontline officers. They've cut call waiting times, they've cut the firearms licensing backlog, and so on. But they've basically privatised a fair part of that police force. They tried to do the same thing in the West Midlands and Surrey, something a little similar. And that fell apart because there was so much opposition to that shift. Now, whether or not that's the right answer for a different model of working in the financially constrained setting that we're in, that shift required a huge amount of disequilibrium, a huge amount of conflict to take it through. So when you're faced with this moment, when you're basically saying, we have to change what we're doing, I've got this vision, you tend to paint this beautiful picture over here. The horizon looks great, we're going through this change, it's going to be really amazing. Most people are listening to it who work for you going, well, I know what's safe here, but I don't want to go over there. So you have to help them doing that. And these two skills come in use. You both have to be listening and humble and get where their pain, get the conflict they're having to face. But also you have to disturb their equilibrium and be bold about the change you want to get to, because the amount of shifting we all have to do in our operating models, in our costs, in the way we relate, in your case to students, but in my case to citizens, requires us to have big ideas and to be able to take them through as leaders. So be bold, be humble. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Emily, before you go down, does anyone have one or two questions for Emily? Is there something that, because my experience is that, the busyness of our day-to-day lives can suck us into just, our habits. And is there anything that you do that enables you to, to be sort of making the sort of consciously good ways of being a leader?
So in my kind of ideal, I'm a perfect woman world, I'm meditating on a daily basis, I'm doing yoga, I'm chatting it through with my partner every night. That doesn't happen. But maybe once a fortnight, I will have a more reflective conversation about what I'm up to. Most evenings, I cycle mostly around London, and most evenings I cycle home and sort of process particularly the emotions from the day. Who's triggered me? Why am I pissed off? Why is that triggering in me, and what therefore are they going to be feeling that I need to listen to? Those sorts of questions for myself. So I try and practice some self-awareness, but I wish I did it better.
Yeah, who doesn't, hey? Well, thank you very much indeed. Thank you. One quick question from the gentleman with the white jacket. Sorry.
How important is it, do you think, to be passionate about what you're doing?
Well, I think it depends on who you are. But for me, it's absolutely essential. And I find when I can tap into my belief in what I'm doing. So when I was clearing the asylum backlog, I passionately believed that there were these nearly 500,000 people who were in limbo, and that was just wrong. They needed to have an answer on their case, and that motivated me to do what I was doing. When I was running policing, I passionately believed that here were all these police officers who desperately wanted to keep the public safe, but weren't being held to account properly. So it was really important that they were. So I get motivated by those sorts of things. I think it depends what motivates you. You might be motivated by doing a good job, by making things efficient, by teaching people, whatever it is. But for me, you've got to, when things are difficult, you've got to connect back to the thing that gets you up out of bed and makes you want to go to work.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.